Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Okay, good. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all in such a full house. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to the UK for hosting this important event. My name is Susan Rufo. I am the Senior Advisor for Ocean and Climate at the United Nations Foundation, and it is my pleasure to be the moderator of this session today on Transport Day. We have already heard a lot of exciting announcements and commitments around the maritime sector and decarbonizing shipping throughout COP, but particularly today, including the very amazing Clydebank Declaration this morning. Congratulations to the UK for that. I understand it's now up to 21 countries. So congratulations to all of those countries that have signed on to that. That's a really, really exciting development. And I think it's fitting that we are in the midst of COP right now, still in the negotiations, but also talking about what we can do to make those commitments real. We have a long way to go, and every sector needs to be part of this transition. The discussion of the climate crisis cannot stop at this conference. It cannot be contained in this conference hall or be done every year. I think we need to really move it forward through the sector and through all of our other platforms that we have, and that's part of the reason why we're here today. We are here specifically to talk about how we take the urgency from this conference and move it forward, specifically into some of the other platforms that we have, including the International Maritime Organization. And so to start that discussion, we have a panel of distinguished members and representatives of member states here. And I'm going to ask them a couple of questions to get their thoughts on how we take this momentum and sense of urgency from COP26 into the International Maritime Organization, but also into the maritime sector more broadly. And then I will turn the floor over to Minister Koertz and Secretary General Lim to have and to get their thoughts on that question. So I'm going to start with a brief introduction of our panelists here. And then, because we have a limited amount of time, I'm just going to ask them a couple of questions. So it is my honor and pleasure to introduce the first member of our panel, who is Mr. Harry Conway. He is the alternate permanent representative of Liberia to the International Maritime Organization and also the vice chair of the Marine Environment Protection Committee, the MEPC, which we will likely hear more about in a little bit. And the second member of our panel is Mr. Clarence Samuel. He is the director of the Climate Change Directorate for the Republic of the Marshall Islands. And the final member of our panel is Mr. Andrew Rakestraw. Mr. Rakestraw is Senior Advisor to U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, on issues related to the IMO and the UNFCCC. He is also the Deputy Head of Delegation here at COP26. So thank you all for making time in your very busy schedules to join us here today. Now, because we have a limited time, I am going to ask the panel just 2 questions, and I'll ask you to take a couple of minutes to answer each of the questions, and then we can go from there. So, diving right in, we have heard a lot about the importance of the shipping sector to meeting the 1.5 target. It's 3% of global emissions. So, we've also heard a lot today and throughout COP about the feasibility and the potential to really reach a zero emissions by 2050 target in this sector. We've heard that from governments. We've also heard that from the private sector. So on a practical level, what are the policy measures that we need to have in place in order to reach that goal of zero emissions by 2050, and also to make sure that we are aligned with a 1.5 degree trajectory? And so, Mr. Samuel, I'd like to start with you on that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan, for the opportunity, and also UK for inviting RMI to take part in this today's panel. As one of the world's largest shipping registries and as one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change, the Marshall Islands has long advocated for ambitious and urgent action to reduce greenhouse gas emission in the shipping industry. The science is clear that we must align our sectors and industries with a 1.5 degree pathway if we are to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. This means that we must achieve zero emission in the shipping industry no later than 2050. The Marshall Islands was proud to sign the Zero Declaration on Shipping put forth by Denmark last week, calling for full decarbonization of the sectors by 2050. And at that upcoming IMO session later this month, we will call on all member states to support achieving zero emission no later than 2050. However, we are in the middle of a task to quickly finalize the policy solutions needed to get us on the pathway to decarbonization. I am proud to report that Marshall Islands, along with the Solomon Islands, have not just led the debate on midterm measures at the IMO, but put forth the only policy option that is a combination of ambition and equity. Our proposal would establish a mandatory universal greenhouse gas levy that would put a price of $100 on each ton of carbon. The levy would raise funds to invest in the transition to decarbonization, but also to support vulnerable countries like mine with their climate change adaptation goals. The proposal addresses the urgency and the scale of the issue, and most important, it is aligned with a 1.5-degree pathway. It is these types of ambition carbon pricing proposal that are needed to shift the trajectory of the maritime industry. And at the most recent IMO discussion in October on the topic, we saw increased momentum to the levy. Last week, it then came the explicit support from the 48 member of the CVF, or the Climate Vulnerable Forum, in their Dakar Glasgow Declaration. This adds a further critically important feature. It is politically acceptable to a wide community across industry developed and developing countries. If we want to move forwards, not just on ambition and equity, but also with speed at the IMO, it is the only option. We look forward to working with other member states in the IMO this November to advance these policies. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you very much. Mr. Conway, I would love your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Susan. I'm glad, thank the UK for inviting me here. My thoughts on this is clear. Given a recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the 6th assessment report, it is now clear that we are at a precipice. So either we act, not just act, we have to act urgently, pragmatically, and realistically. So at the IMO, during our intersessional working group on GHG gas, we adopted what we call the carbon intensity indicator reduction factor, or the Z factor. Now from between 2020 to 2026, we were aiming for 11%, but we deliberately left from 2027 to 2030 blank. We didn't put in any percentage. Given the evidence we have now, because at IMO we say evidence-based. Where is the evidence? Where is the experience learned? Based on the evidence we have, I think it is an opportunity now we have to go in and say, look, we have to increase the ambition. Because I remember during that time, during the working group, there were countries that had proposals on the table for as much as 30% to 35%. So we now have to go and take a look at that and see how realistic that is. With that done, another thing we have to do at the policy level is we already have our 2018 greenhouse gas strategy. Now, that strategy was aiming, we were saying we have to make sure we reach zero by the end of the century, or within the end of the century. But now, from what we have, the Titanic is sinking. There's no time. So now, are we still going to go by that? So we have to review the greenhouse gas strategy and see what can be done to make sure that we meet this net zero that we are talking about at least by the middle of the century, which is 2050. So those are things that will be done at the IMO level. Next week, we have the 2 weeks time by the 22nd of this month. MEPC 77 is going to take place as a Marshall Island just measure. They have on the table proposals. People are talking about this issue of carbon levy. It's a possibility. The industry also have on the table a proposal to establish a research and development fund. It's on the table. We need to look at this. So I'm sure from what I have seen here at COP, these policies measure will definitely gain some traction. So when we come to the question number 2, we'll see how we address the challenges and opportunities and how countries can work together to make sure we don't go at the usual snail pace that we go at the IMO.
Thank you. Mr. Rakestraw.
Thanks so much, and thanks so much for the opportunity to speak to these important issues. At the outset, I'd like to make a few remarks. I think first, the message from COP26 is absolutely clear. We must do everything in our power to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. What the science shows us is that requires a 45% reduction in global CO2 emissions by the year 2030. And that requires action from all. I mean, just because the shipping sector is a hard-to-abate sector, it doesn't mean that it's somehow exempt from the need to take urgent action to address this crisis. So just want to take stock, and I guess at least four particular issues. I think the first is just the critical role of that governments can play in sending a political signal on the need for decarbonization. The last week, led by Denmark, supported by the U.S., we supported a declaration that the Marshall Islands also joined on calling on the IMO to adopt a goal of zero emissions by the year 2050. But I mean, from our perspective, 2050 is even too far off. We need to take urgent actions this decade at the IMO to really put this sector on the right path. And quite honestly, we're concerned about the trajectory of this sector's emissions, given that recent decisions at the IMO have actually allowed this sector's emissions to continue to increase over the coming 10 years, as opposed to reduce dramatically, which we know that science requires. The second, there are certainly positive developments we're seeing on the demand side here. There are a number of really exciting initiatives and announcements that we've seen both at COP and before. For example, the cargo owner zero emission vessel. The U.S. announced what's called the First Movers Coalition, the Getting to Zero Coalition. So there's clear demand for zero emission shipping from the largest consumers. The third issue, and this goes to what you talked about, is the regulatory side. And obviously IMO is the place to address this sector's emissions. And there, from the U.S. side, we have supported a proposal for a low greenhouse gas fuel standard, which would really play to IMO's strengths, which is directly regulating the sector's emissions through very specific annual targets that the sector would need to achieve in order to actually ensure the transition to zero emission fuels. And in that certainty is something that, at least when we talk with the private sector and the shipping industry on these issues, that's certainty that they want, and that's certainly something that they seem to be asking for. And the final issue is there's certainly some real-world encouragement as well in terms of the types of demonstration projects and commitments that we've heard, for example, from Maersk to, in fact, start to build these types of ships and to put in place the, to facilitate the necessary infrastructure to make this transition. So I think, on the whole, this COP, if it sends one signal, it's on the need for this sector to step up its game and to do so as soon as possible. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So not surprisingly, complex problem. There's not one solution, but I heard themes of carbon pricing. I heard themes of technology development and demonstration. I heard themes of enabling conditions, like we hear in every other sector on climate change. I think we have a goal, or we have an opportunity here in this sector, because we do have things like the IMO, to maybe have these discussions in a bit more of a framework. And as Mr. Conway pointed out, in 12 days, the IMO will be meeting to discuss this. So that's another very close opportunity to really look at the momentum here. I want to turn to another part of the puzzle. Obviously, our ability to actually deal with the climate crisis is going to depend on our ability to make sure that no one is left behind, and that's a big theme of this COP as well. And so I think there's much more that we could be doing to really think about how we discuss that. And so with that in mind, I'd like to ask you all, what are the challenges and opportunities for developing countries in ensuring that we are decarbonizing the shipping sector, and how can developing and developed countries work together to ensure that we can actually succeed in these goals? And so, Mr. Conway, I'll start with you this time.
Thank you, Susan. In terms of challenges, the number one challenge there is the issue of what I would call developing countries are technology takers. In other words, they don't have the capacity and the capability to undertake the kind of research and development that you need in the technology sector to decarbonize. So they won't be taking part in that aspect of the puzzle. Another challenge that follows that is the issue of access. When you develop these technologies to decarbonize, is it accessible to them? That's another challenge. So that brings into question, how do you make sure that they are not, as you repeat the poll, nobody is left behind? Because if they don't have access, or that you see we are dealing with a collective action problem that does not respect borders, and we're dealing with a problem that does not distinguish between developed and developing countries. So if they cannot have the technology, all you will see happening in the shipping sector is you have vessels that are not environmentally friendly, while they won't be trading in the developed countries or in other regions, they will be displaced and be trading in the developing countries. At the end of the day, we have defeated the purpose for which we are trying to decarbonize in the first place, because the emission that will be coming out is not going to be restricted to the developing countries. So those are the key challenges that the developing countries will face. So what can we do to help them? Or what can nations do, the developed and the developing countries do to work together? The first and foremost thing is we have to approach the whole problem like the way we are approaching the COVID crisis. When COVID struck, what you saw developed and developing countries doing was coming together. It wasn't the matter of distinguishing. So resources were pooled, even industries or the pharmaceutical companies, they didn't demand the usual kind of rigidity that they would have demanded before they would start sharing their findings or trying to help the world. Everybody tried to solve that problem. That's how we have to approach this climate crisis that we are facing. We are on the precipice. So developed countries that may have the technology, they may find opportunities and ways to share with developing countries. That's number one. Number two, there has to be trust building between the parties. If there's no trust, I can tell you from what I said when we are negotiating, when there's no trust, it's difficult to progress issues. So once you have this trust building between the parties, I'm sure there'll be technical support, assistance to the developing countries to make sure they have the needed technology, especially probably out of renewable energy. If in your refineries to see you have the 0.05 sulfur content limit within your fuel, or we can even aim for 0.1%, provided they have the needed technology in their refineries. And then if you can also provide some kind of access, I talk about access to financing, there's going to be a lot of funds all over the place. The carbon levy he talked about. So if we have this carbon levy and there's funds generated, where the funds reach these developing countries, these are things we have to make sure the developed and developing countries work together. If we can do these things, I'm sure we can meet that zero carbon limit by 2050. But it's going to take a lot of, we cannot work the same old way we used to work. We cannot continue with the same old kind of excuses or debates that since 1992, when the UNFCCC was first signed in Brazil, we cannot continue with the same excuses. The urgency of the matter is, can there be one person here that can tell me that when you see floods running through China or running through India, or you see the fires cutting through California, the hurricanes, does it not touch your heart? It touches your heart. So that's how we have to approach this climate change problem. So we have to break that barrier of developing and not developing and work together. At the end of this hall, as I was coming in from the other side, I saw some climate activists or people. They said what we actually need is conscience. And Her Royal Highness talked about that when she opened this conference. She talked about planet and people. Prince Charles also talked about it. The royal family have taken it. So what's going to happen in the UK is going to, I would say I would designate the UK as a champion because they have done a significant job, a fantastic job, but now they need to take that momentum forward, reach across the aisle, talk to your brothers and let's make sure we see it as a collective action problem. As I'm saying, the Titanic is sinking. There may be no time to save Jack, but at least we can save Rose.
Thank you. Mr. Rakestraw, what would you like to add?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think the first thing I would say is, over 90% of the world ships are built in 3 countries. So in terms of the actual construction of these vessels, this is less of a developing country divide, and I think that the same developing country divides that we see in the UNFCCC don't exactly match on to the international shipping sector. Really what it is that we're talking about and the concerns that we're hearing in the context of the IMO are with regards to the downstream impacts of any measures that are adopted in the sector and the corresponding rise in freight rates. This is obviously a core concern, and we can't have any measures, imposing disproportionately negative impacts on certain countries. Hearteningly, the IMO has kind of enshrined this concept within its overall framework. So, there are some very clear provisions in our work that, before finalization of any measure, we will consider the impacts and address any disproportionately negative impacts. The issue, though, comes in when, we view that framework as actually a way to take more action because it should provide the comfort that these impacts aren't going to be disproportionate on others, as opposed to an excuse for inaction. And I think that's really the core here, is that we've built a framework at the IMO from our perspective to ensure that the sector moves in a way from fossil fuels in a way that is going to be fair for all, and to ensure that that transition is just. And so, from the message that I would give and to the IMO is, that, just getting on with our work and, getting into the discussions on the measures and getting something adopted as soon as possible, I think is really the key signal that the organization needs to show to, demonstrate that it continues to be the global leader and continues to be relevant.
Thank you. Mr. Samuel, I'll give you the final word on this question.
Thank you. Well, the first thing that developing and developed countries need to do is to encourage and assure the international shipping sector that the goal of zero emission is critical to saving all. And secondly, I agree with my colleague from Liberia. We need to build trust. And we need to rebuild the trust in the system and trust among each other. The other thing we need to agree to is early on is that the transition of the international shipping sector needs to be equitable, ensuring that no one is left behind. Every country, large or small, rich or poor, needs to be part of any transition. Part of this trust is to recognize and pursue a principle that allows CITs, LDCs, and developing countries the support and resources to address their current mitigation and adaptation needs. It is therefore important that we send the strongest yet appropriate signals to the market that we require and encourage the best innovative development for low-emission fuel designs and technology to move us all in this direction together. As a small island developing state, we are committed to reducing our domestic footprint in the shipping industry, and CITs have been leading the way so far. Through our Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership, RMI and other PCITs have committed to achieving zero emission from our domestic shipping transport emission by 2050, with a 40% reduction by 2030. The cost of transition to zero emission is high, but the price on carbon would help us ease the transition over time. Under our levy proposal, revenue could be directed to places like Green Climate Fund, which would help us with our transition. While there are other many challenges, we see more opportunities in this space. but we need to work together, and we need the IMO to heed the calls here in Glasgow to align with the 1.5 pathway. Thank you.
Thank you. I heard a lot of themes there that I think that don't just apply to the IMO, but also apply to the overall discussions that we're having here at UNFCCC. So thank you all for that. And, I think obviously our ability to ensure that no one is left behind and that everyone is participating in this transition is going to be key to our success in transitioning the sector, but also solving the climate crisis more broadly. And I'd like to think that the maritime sector could actually be a leader in that. And from a lot of what I've seen, I think there's hope and possibility for that. Okay. So there's a lot more we could discuss, but I just got the signal that we should move on. So I think this has laid a very good foundation for the discussion that will come in a moment, to talk a little bit more about where we can go and what we're doing and how what we're doing here at COP is going to link into what the IMO is doing, what the sector is doing. It's also really underscored the importance of ambition and urgency. Not only here at COP, but across all of the platforms that we have and across all of our sectors. So I thank you all for that. I am looking forward to seeing this momentum carried forward in 12 days at the IMO meeting and the meeting of the MEPC. I think the eyes of the world will be on that meeting because that is the first time the international community will come together post-COP. And that is the first time that I think a lot of the discussions and commitments and actions that we've talked about here will be put to the test. So I think it's a real challenge and a real opportunity for the sector. So thank you all for being part of that, and I feel better knowing that it's in your hands. And now I am excited to turn the floor over to two people who are really going to be leading that discussion and that transition, who can tell us more about that challenge. So it is my honor to introduce Minister Robert Koorts. Well, first of all, thank you to all of you. And it is my honor to introduce Minister Robert Koorts. Minister Koorts is the UK's Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Transport with responsibility for aviation, maritime, and security. Minister, thank you for your energy and for your passion on these issues. I am also honored to introduce Mr. Kitack Lim, who has been the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization since 2016. And Secretary General Lim, it is wonderful to see the IMO and you personally so active here at COP this year. Thank you both for taking time to join us, and Minister Koorts, I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks to the panel as well for that fascinating discussion just now. Could I just formally just say welcome to the UK Pavilion to everybody, and thank you very much indeed for coming along to listen to this conversation today, and thank you very much for the moderation that you've been on the previous debate. I really appreciate that. Well, we are in the UK we're lucky and we're honoured, and it's a great pleasure to host the UN's International Maritime Organization in London. And for me in the Department for Transport, only just over the Thames is the IMO. And for anyone who knows that part of the Thames, you'll recognize it because it's the big building that has a ship at the front. So if you've ever walked past along the South Bank and wondered what that is, that's the IMO. And it's my great pleasure and my honor to welcome Mr. Kitack Lim, the Secretary General, along today and to COP, and welcome and thank you for coming. To take part in the conversation between he and I today. So we're going to just discuss what each of us is doing on the course to zero, both from an IMO perspective and from the point of view of the UK's Department for Transport. So welcome and thank you. Thank you. Now, Mr. Secretary General, it's quite clear that the IMO has a big work programme going on in both environmental issues broadly and in decarbonisation particularly. And I'll ask you a bit more about decarbonisation in a moment, but perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about what you see as being the way ahead for the IMO.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. First of all, on top of your explanation about the IMO, I have to mention not only a very nice building with a ship in Parano build, but we have a very, very nice cafe restaurant. So I hope you enjoy from time to time. And also, I'm very honored to participate in COP26. I believe this is much more successful than expected. And more people look excited to talk about climate change issues. Congratulations. And when it comes to what we are doing regarding maritime climate change policy issues, IMO actually started the climate change issues already before the 2010. However, 2018, based on accumulated effort, IMO adopted the initial GHG strategy, April 2018, that we have a level of ambition and the guiding principle and the short-term, mid-term major options. But it was a very successful milestone. In the course of that, you are the home host government, UK, has been working very hard to support. But it has been working until now about our development of regulation or guidelines. So this year, June, we adopted a very important short-term measure, technical measure. The one is, we call it related EEXI. This is a technical one, related ship's speed. And second one, carbon intensity index, CII. This is a carbon intensity index per ship. Third one, we developed the CII rating system. So in the first time in IMO convention history, first time introduced rating system. Every ship is a given rating, A, B, C, D, E. C is the middle. D or E rating, they have to go through separate procedure to improve. This is the major one. This can be used by private sector as well, like finance sector or charterers, etc. On top of that, what we are doing, as your minister knows, recently we have seen a lot of natural disaster, wildlife, heat wave around the world, including Europe. So nowadays we have a much higher awareness about the climate change issues. That's why, based on discussion, based on development, recent development, we are now in the process making further progress. One, we need to upgrade our level of ambition. Level of ambition that will be completed by 2023, but will be facilitated. Second one, we are considering about the fuel issues. One, fuel standard in terms of CO2 contents, and think about the future fuels. And the third one, we are developing market-based measure, which is like economic measure toward ships fuels. This market measure is a very important tool to expedite, encourage shipping community or member state, expedite all the GHG process. On top of that, we are going to develop our emission reduction factor as well. This is a very technical matter, reduction factor as well. We made a certain plan up to 26, but we further develop reduction factor based on progress in terms of level of ambition or market measure, etc. Based on development by 2023, and we will enhance or develop further reduction factor. This is overall development of the IMO. But in conclusion, awareness, understanding, and the commitment regarding climate change issues much higher than a few years ago. So, thank you.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more about that last point, Mr. Secretary General. I'm sure the audience will. That we all accept there's a lot of work to do on climate change issues, but the awareness and the willingness and the ambition for dealing with them is so much greater, much more in excess it was a few years ago. And it's clear that the IMO has a very large work program in place on environmental issues more broadly, and particularly on decarbonisation. And what do you think would be the most important thing when we're looking at decarbonisation? What should we be working on in the IMO?
I would say one is like a technology. One is a technology. Technology is divided into two. One is a technology regarding future fuel oil, one. And another one is shipbuilding, ship's design, engine, propulsion system. This is another technological area. But when it comes to technology area, but I am very optimistic. Once IMO set upgraded the ambition, which is a guidance to the private sector, including shipping and the shipbuilding, there will be there will be development of technological issues following our the guideline, including fuel issues and ship is hardware issues as well. Another area, actually, this is one element which is very important challenge. Majority of IMO member states, out of 175, majority are willing to commit to make progress in climate change issues. However, the economic social status different among member states. Some member states, actually, they are concerned about certain economic impact by the IMO measure. So this is one area, how do we address? So we need actually financial resources to help support those developing countries. That's why in that sense, IMO is talking about how to use possible funds from a market-based measure to support the developing countries. So this is one of the important elements. On top of that, what we are doing at the moment, we are actually providing a lot of different programs, education, training, toward shipping, carbon public sector, or partly private sector as well. And also we are promoting partnership among member states, between member states and between member states and like a private sector as well, in order to encourage their commitment, their effort toward the climate change issue. This is something area, but I'm talking about this one, but it is really challenging, which need more financial resources.
Thank you. It was really clear there's a massive program of work there, and it's the international aspect of this which is so encouraging. And of course, that's everything that the IMO does, but this is such a massive issue. And it's so important that we take action on this together, because it's a worldwide problem. And so although the UK will, has a number of programs that we have, it's the work that we do with you, I think, which is just so vital, because it's a worldwide issue. We have to come up with a worldwide solution.
Yeah, that's true. I'm really absolutely agree what you're talking about. Worldwide solution, worldwide challenge. That means everyone, including myself, we need global perspective to progress, to help others as well. We are living in the global village. We are talking about climate change, which is purely global issues. So based on global mindset, we can make progress. But at the same time, I would like to ask you, Minister. So UK is holding COP26, very successful. There has been a lot of noise before you holding this COP26 in person. Lots of doubts. However, we see very successful. So UK government has been working hard, supporting others. Also in the maritime sector, UK government has been working, contributing a lot. In that sense, would you please share with us some of what the UK is doing on shipping, maritime sector in terms of climate change and in line with the COP26?
Absolutely, and thank you. And thank you for your kind words on the success of COP. It's obviously a massive conference, one of the biggest the UK has ever held, of enormous, unprecedented importance as an issue. But particularly to be holding it in the as we come out of the COVID crisis adds another layer of complexity to it as well. But I have to say, I'm sure we'll all agree how good it is to be seeing each other in person and to meet and discuss these issues together rather than through the Zoom screen, which much as it has its use, it also has its limitations. But yes, in terms of the UK's approach, so some of our work is domestic, and some of it is international, some is domestic, but ultimately with a international application. I think one of the leading programs that we've had is the Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition. This was a £23 million fund. It's best understood as seed corn funding. So it's not for government to decide that a particular kind of technology is going to be the solution. It's government's job to create the right regulatory environment and to provide the stimulus so that those in the market and in industry, those are the real experts, can really get stuck in and to find out what the solutions are likely to be to the propulsion issues that we face amongst all the others in wider shipping. Because, of course, if we look at the picture that surrounds us here, we have the part of the range of shipping there, the small tug, the sort of ship, the vessel for which electric propulsion might be appropriate. And then we have the large container ship, where electric propulsion would be very difficult. And then we're looking for a much more far-reaching change of propulsion for those ships. And the Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition is intended to let all of those people with amazing, bright ideas demonstrate what they can do. And we met some of them just yesterday. One of the great things that we've been able to do at COP is to have a meeting down at the Maritime Hub, the International Maritime Hub, where we met just yesterday the 50 winners, and with support from about 280 in this wider supply chain, all of whom have been working on some truly incredible ideas. Now, in the recent spending review that you'll all have heard about, we've announced that the CMDC will be a multi-year program. So we're looking to expand that further and to have many more of these great ideas be brought forward. So that's domestic, but you can see how in the course of time, a lot of that technology will have an international application as well. But looking much more at the international focus here at COP, we've had two major announcements, one last night and one this morning. And the one last night was Operation Zero, and that is intended to see how the rapidly growing wind generation industry in the North Sea in particular can look to decarbonise. So the workboats that service that, who set up that industry, how they can decarbonise, that's a major announcement we're looking to see there, to see that can be electric and wider form of zero carbon propulsion as soon as possible. But just this morning, Mr. Secretary General, I announced the Clydebank Declaration. Hugely appropriate on the banks of the Clyde, this famous great river where people have been sailing for millennia. That we make this big announcement of green shipping lanes, and that's the way to think about it. And it's about 21 countries now who are part. 2 countries, in fact, I'm delighted to say Italy and Morocco, signed up whilst I was speaking. So you can see the progress and the real energy that there is behind this. And that is intended to create countries that have real high ambition in this space, who really want to see green shipping between them. That is that high-level declaration where we've said that's what we're going to do, is net zero shipping between the countries like ourselves, Denmark, France, Germany, the United States, and we will be leading the way. And that is clearly international by nature on a bilateral basis, but we want to see much more of this. And then we'll be looking, and perhaps the final thing I'll say at this stage is through the IMO. We are pushing as the UK for a much higher level of ambition through the IMO to see greater steps towards net zero and zero emission as we go further forward. Because as we start off by saying, it's an international problem and it needs an international solution. It's through the IMO that we'll do our best work.
Thank you, Minister. As you mentioned, the global shipping community, I'm very proud of that. Like the shipping event last Saturday, shipping community themselves are highly committed to contribute to climate changes. They want to more progress, and then they want to more earlier guidance from IMO for the climate change issues. Very promising. Today, as I mentioned, just the Clydebank Declaration mentioned of the green ship corridors. I stayed briefly, but it is very, very innovative, revolutionary idea. So that would be giving a huge impact to the global shipping community. Having said that, COP26 is, I'd like to ask you, COP26 is first 5 years term the COP meeting since the Paris Agreement 2015, actually 1 year delayed. So in that sense, COP26 has a very high important meaning in terms of nature if it is the case, how do you think, this outcome of the COP26, how UK government is going to utilize success or outcome of COP26 in order to promote like a campaign around the world? How do you plan to like convey those messages based on your experience outcome to the maritime sectors?
Well, I felt that energy this morning as well, and huge energy and enthusiasm, I think, from the entirety of the maritime sector. They really, really want, everybody wants to do this because they know it's the right thing to do. Also, they can see there's opportunities there. So this isn't something that the sector is doing just because it has to. They're doing it because of a passionate desire to revolutionise the way that we do shipping. We've really seen over the course of the last 2 years the critical importance that maritime has in keeping us all supplied, in making sure that we have everything that we need. It could be food, it could be PPE. We're an interconnected world. We're always going to be an interconnected world, and it's exactly the right place to be. But we do have to tackle this great challenge as well. So what I really want to do is to use COP26, yes, to produce some announcements of its own, but to harness that energy and that enthusiasm that we see all around us every day here, and then to take that forward with all of our conversations with our international partners, both bilaterally and through the IMO, to see this as a springboard for the things that we'll go ahead and do in the future. And so, for example, at the IMO, we are very keen to see greater ambition, and a zero emission sector by 2050 is something we're pushing for. So the work that we're doing here is critical. But this isn't all of the work. We don't go home from COP and say, job's done. We go home from COP and say, wasn't that a massive step forward? Now let's go and do more.
So definitely COP26 will be working very positively to the progress, further progress of the climate change issues. So anyway, I'm really pleased to be here and join the COP26, also collaborating with the UK government, and really grateful to your ministry for the strong supporting effort to the all IMO work. So I'm very not only proud of our international shipping, not only proud of the all member states, but particularly I'm proud of the host government, COP26 UK. Thank you for your support.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It'll always be there, and thank you very much for everything you do, both with the UK government, but within the whole IMO structure. Critical times, and we're very glad that you're in the driving seat. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.